At my own wedding, in front of friends, family, and people I hadn't seen in years, my stepmother leaned in toward my aunt, barely bothering to lower her voice, and said, "She's just pretending to be loved." I heard it. Every word landed like a slap. Before I could process what she meant, my father laughed, actually laughed, and added, "She's lucky he even showed up." I felt my stomach twist. I was standing just a few feet away waiting for the cake to be brought out when their words hit me square in the chest. It was like I had been shoved underwater in a room full of people. The lights were warm, the music was soft, guests were smiling, but all I could hear was that sentence replaying in my mind. "She's just pretending to be loved." He laughed. He said I was lucky Oliver even showed up. That was my father, the man who once used to carry me on his shoulders, who told me bedtime stories when I was small, who kissed my forehead after I lost my first tooth. But after my mom passed and he married Janice, something in him hardened, or maybe it just changed direction. Either way, I wasn't his priority anymore. I was a loose end from a different life. For years, I tried to earn his approval again. I stayed out of trouble, got good grades, smiled when Janice made little remarks at dinner, kept my mouth shut when her daughter Callie got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. I told myself he'd notice eventually. He never did. But on that day, my wedding day, I had let myself believe, just for once, that things could feel whole, that maybe, surrounded by celebration and vows and white lace, my family could show up for me like I'd always dreamed they would. Instead, I stood in my white dress, holding a glass of champagne, and heard my stepmother reduce my relationship to a performance. I watched my father mock my value like I was a joke. I wanted to disappear. Then something happened. Oliver, my husband, my safe place, must have seen my face fall. I didn't even know he was paying attention at that moment. But he walked up to the mic. There was no announcement, no signal, just the sound of him clearing his throat and a hush falling over the room. Everyone turned. I froze. He looked directly at my father and Janice. Calm, clear, eyes steady. And then he said, "I'm marrying her for this one reason." The room fell silent. You could feel it, like the wind got knocked out of the entire building. My breath caught in my throat. No one expected what came next, but what Oliver said in the next few seconds didn't just change the mood, it changed everything, and I'll never forget the look on their faces. The morning of my wedding started like a dream, the kind of soft, golden-lit dream you think only happens in movies or someone else's life. My bridesmaids were buzzing around me, pinning curls, adjusting straps, laughing about how I wouldn't eat anything but strawberries all morning because I was too nervous to chew. But underneath all of it, under the silk robe, the lip gloss, the fake lashes, I was holding my breath. Not because I doubted marrying Oliver. That part, that love, was the only thing I was completely sure of. It was the other part, the part I'd been pretending not to think about for weeks, my family. Janice was there, of course, stepmother of the year in her champagne-colored gown that she insisted was beige, not too close to white, even though we both knew better. She walked in like she owned the room, complimented the decor like she was inspecting a hotel lobby, and took over my makeup chair before I could sit down. She gave me a kiss on the cheek, light, cold, performative, and said, "Let's hope you don't cry too much during the vows. Waterproof mascara can only do so much." No, "I'm proud of you." No hug, no warmth, just her usual subtle digs, wrapped in sugar and delivered with a smile. My dad came in an hour later. He didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't really say anything at all. Just glanced around the room, gave me a nod and said, "Well, you look ready." Ready? Not beautiful, not radiant, just ready, like I was walking into a job interview, not the biggest moment of my life. He'd been like that for years now. Distant, flat. Sometimes I wondered if he even remembered what I looked like as a child, when I used to race down the hallway just to be the first one to hug him after work. That man disappeared when my mother died. I think we both disappeared a little after that. Losing my mom was the first time I understood that grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just makes people quieter. I was 13. I remember the smell of her clothes when we packed them away. I remember her humming in the kitchen while stirring pasta. And I remember how, within a year, Janice had moved in with her own daughter, Callie, and my dad had started over. without me. From the moment Janice arrived, I became invisible. Not to everyone, just to the one person who should have made me feel safe. She never said anything cruel in public, but her words were always sharp in private, and my dad never stepped in. He let it happen. He let me shrink. So on my wedding day, when I stood in front of the mirror in my dress, I tried to hold on to the one thing that felt true. Oliver. He saw me. Always had. We met 3 years ago at a volunteer event for foster youth. I was there to help run a writing workshop. He was organizing supplies for the art table. We barely spoke until lunch when he sat down across from me and said, "You look like someone who believes in lost causes." I laughed. He smiled like he'd been waiting for me to do that, and I knew, right then, that something important had just happened. Oliver never made me feel like I had to earn his affection. He listened. He showed up. He knew when I was spiraling and when I just needed silence. He gave me space, but never left me alone. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to audition for love. That's what made the rest of the day so painful. I thought I had finally built something strong enough to stand in front of my family with pride. I thought maybe my dad would look at me and see someone worth rooting for, that maybe, just maybe, Janice would at least pretend to be happy for me. But even as the ceremony began, even as I walked down the aisle, locking eyes with the man who had made me feel chosen every single day, I could feel Janice's gaze on me like a weight. I could sense the tightness in my father's posture, like he couldn't relax even here. Still, I smiled. I said my vows. I let myself believe the worst was behind me. I had no idea what was waiting at the reception, but I would soon. And when it came, it didn't just hurt. It cracked something open I'd been holding shut for years. The ceremony had been beautiful, simple, intimate. We wrote our own vows, and Oliver got choked up halfway through his. His voice cracked when he said, "You're the calm in every storm I didn't know I was weathering." I couldn't even get through mine without crying. For a few perfect hours, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the weight I carried didn't matter. Everyone clapped, the music played, and we walked back up the aisle like something out of a photo album you'd want to show your future kids. But the magic faded faster than I expected. At the reception, the tables were glowing with candles and little cards I'd hand-wrote for every guest. Everyone told me it felt warm, welcoming, like a hug of a wedding. I tried to stay in that bubble, surrounded by laughter, glasses clinking, and the occasional happy tear from Oliver's side of the family, but there was a shadow following me through the entire evening, and her name was Janice. She sat at the head table, of course. Front and center, just beside my dad, legs crossed, drink in hand, her posture perfect, her expressions tightly controlled, like she was a guest of honor instead of a barely tolerated obligation. Every time I looked over, she was scanning the room, like she was measuring whether or not she approved. I tried to ignore it. I danced with Oliver's nieces, hugged old friends, thanked guests for coming. But during one of those brief, quiet moments, when the caterers were bringing out the cake and the MC was prepping the mic, I stood a few steps behind our table, catching my breath. That's when I heard her. Janice. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She leaned in toward my Aunt Marlene, one of the few people from my mom's side who had shown up, and said very clearly, "She's just pretending to be loved. It's all for show." Like I was some prop in my own wedding, like Oliver and I had staged the entire thing for attention, as if love, real love, couldn't possibly belong to someone like me. And then my dad, my own father, laughed. Not an awkward chuckle, full amused snort like he'd been holding it in all night. "She's lucky he even showed up," he said, shaking his head. "He'll realize soon enough." Didn't even realize I was holding my glass tighter until I heard the crack. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. I felt everything inside me freeze. My heart started pounding, and suddenly the room didn't feel warm anymore. It felt suffocating, loud, bright, blurred, like I'd been pulled underwater in the middle of my own celebration. I turned away before they could see the tears welling up. I forced a smile at the photographer who passed by, murmured something about needing air, and walked outside for a moment. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, still, trying to breathe. My entire life, I had been shrinking to make room for them, for Janice's jabs, for my father's silence. I had done everything I could to keep the peace, to avoid being the problem child, to just survive until I could leave. But now, I was a grown woman, a wife, and it still wasn't enough. I wanted to go back inside and pretend I hadn't heard it. I wanted to smile through the cake cutting, push through the speeches, and get through the night without ruining anything. That was always my role. Don't ruin anything. Then I saw Oliver through the window. He was laughing with one of my cousins, completely unaware of what had just happened. And something about that moment, about knowing that he had shown up fully, that he had chosen me without hesitation, broke something open in me. Not in a way that made me weak, but in a way that made me realize I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I wasn't going to walk back into that room and act like everything was fine, because it wasn't. And I was done being the quiet one. As I opened the door to go back inside, I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know Oliver had heard enough to sense something was wrong. I didn't know he'd already made a decision of his own. But something had shifted in both of us, and that moment was the beginning of everything that came next. When I stepped back into the reception hall, the air felt different. Or maybe I did. I wiped under my eyes carefully, making sure no tears smudged my makeup. I smiled at the photographer. I waved at a cousin across the room. No one knew that everything inside me was unraveling. No one but Oliver. He caught my eyes the second I returned to the head table. He was mid-conversation with his brother, but paused, his brow furrowed. He scanned my face like a puzzle he was determined to solve. I could feel the question behind his eyes. What happened? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I forced another smile, reached for my water, and sat down. The next phase of the night was about to start, the speeches. Our MC tapped the microphone and announced, "If anyone would like to share a few words for the bride and groom, now's your chance." People clapped. A few stood up and made sweet, funny, sentimental speeches. Oliver's aunt shared a memory of him as a kid organizing neighborhood movie nights. My friend Kira told a story about how I once left work early to help her pick up her dog from surgery. They were light moments, kind moments, ones you usually hear at a wedding, but I couldn't hear any of it. I kept thinking about Janice's voice, about my dad laughing. They were sitting 2 seats away, completely composed, as if they hadn't just gutted me. Janice had that signature satisfied smile she wore whenever she felt like she'd won something. My dad stared blankly at his wine glass, nodding here and there. I couldn't believe they could be so cruel and so calm. And then Oliver stood up. No warning, no signal, just stood. I grabbed his wrist instinctively. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head gently. "Trust me." That's all he said. Then he walked to the mic. The room quieted immediately. People expected something romantic or funny, a toast maybe. But he wasn't holding a glass. He wasn't smiling. He looked calm, yes, but something in his shoulders, something in his eyes, felt heavier. He took a breath, then looked directly at Janice, at my father. "I wasn't planning to say anything," he began, "but tonight, something's been weighing on me, and I can't sit with it in silence." My heart dropped. I wanted to disappear. I knew where this was going. I also knew there was no stopping him. Oliver turned slightly toward the crowd, but his eyes still lingered on them. "I didn't fall in love with Alara because she's perfect," he said. "I didn't choose her because she's easy or convenient. I chose her because she's real. She's resilient. She carries more pain than most people could handle and still leads with kindness. I've seen her walk through rooms full of people who dismissed her and still find a way to love them." He paused. "She doesn't just pretend to be loved. She is loved. Fiercely. By me. By her friends. By everyone who really knows her." You could feel the ripple moving through the room. And I didn't show up today because I'm doing her a favor. I showed up because this is the best decision I'll ever make. Because I get to spend my life with someone who fights every single day to be better than the people who tried to break her. He looked directly at my father then. I watched as the blood drained from Dad's face. Just a little. I'm proud to marry Alara, not in spite of where she came from, but because of it. Because she still loves in a world that hasn't always loved her back. There was silence, no clapping, just stunned stillness. Then Oliver walked back over, eyes locked on mine. He sat beside me, and took my hand. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, heart wide open, trying to hold the weight of everything he had just done. Janice didn't say another word for the rest of the night. My father didn't even look at me. But Oliver? He didn't let go of my hand for 1 second. That moment was the shift, not just in the evening, but in me. Because for the first time in my life, someone didn't just stand beside me quietly. He stood up for me. I don't know if anyone actually applauded after Oliver sat down. I don't remember hearing anything at all. It was like the entire room had gone into a collective silence, not out of discomfort, but because something sacred had just happened, and everyone knew it. I kept staring at him. He didn't look smug. He wasn't looking around for approval or checking Janice's expression or my dad's reaction. He was just still, steady. Like he had said exactly what he needed to say, and that was enough. And for me, it was more than enough. It was the moment I stopped feeling like I had to shrink. The moment I realized I had married a man who would rather disrupt an entire wedding reception than let me sit with someone else's shame on my shoulders. I glanced across the table. Janice's face was tight. Her jaw clenched just slightly, but she didn't speak. Her glass of white wine was untouched for the first time that evening. Her eyes flicked from person to person, reading the room like she was trying to calculate whether anyone was still on her side. She didn't find much. And my father, he didn't even lift his eyes. He sat there, staring into nothing, lips pressed together like a man who finally realized that silence speaks loudest when it's broken by someone else. That should have felt like justice, but honestly, it just felt sad. Sad that he had a daughter and never really saw her. Sad that I had spent years trying to earn something he never intended to give. And even now, on my wedding day, he wasn't angry or defensive. He was just absent. Again. I turned back to Oliver. He reached up and brushed a hair from my cheek and whispered, "Okay?" I nodded, barely. But it wasn't just okay. It was everything. After that, something in the room lightened. Maybe because the tension had been sliced open, or maybe because people suddenly realized who this day was really about. One by one, guests came up to us. Not to Janice, not to my father, but to us. Oliver's cousins hugged me. My old high school teacher told me, "He's a good man, but you're the reason this room feels like love." My friend Maya whispered, "You're not pretending. You're the most loved person in here." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The rest of the reception felt different. The music felt louder, freer. The laughter wasn't tight anymore. It wasn't polite, it was joyful. Like people had been holding something back and now they didn't have to. Oliver and I danced. Really danced. Not just the slow, swaying kind of dance couples do when everyone's watching. We spun and laughed and stumbled and kissed between lyrics like no one else was in the room. That freedom, that fullness. I'd never felt it before. Later, when it was time for the cake, the MC asked if anyone else had a final toast. Janice started to rise. I watched her, unsure what she was about to say. Maybe something petty, maybe something fake and graceful. But she stopped, looked at my dad, then sat back down without saying a word. That silence? That was my peace offering. The cake was cut. My best friend caught the bouquet. The flower girl fell asleep on her mom's lap after one too many cookies. It became the wedding I had dreamed of, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It had heart and honesty and people who saw me clearly, finally. But the real moment, the one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, didn't come during a dance or a speech. It came in the parking lot after we'd said goodbye to the last few guests. I was standing barefoot on the concrete, holding my heels in one hand and the hem of my dress in the other. Oliver opened the passenger door for me, then paused and said, "You okay, really?" I looked up at the man I just married, the man who took a microphone and shattered years of silence. And I smiled, fully, deeply, like I never had before. "I am now," I said, and I meant it. In the days after the wedding, everything slowed down. The flowers wilted. The rented chairs were returned. The photos started trickling in from guests' phones. People called to say how beautiful the ceremony was, how touching Oliver's words had been. But underneath all the thank you notes and leftover cake, something bigger had shifted. Me. I wasn't the same woman who had walked down the aisle, secretly hoping her father might finally say something kind. I wasn't the same woman who had spent most of her life trying to earn a place at her own family's table, and I wasn't pretending anymore. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the shame they had handed me. After the wedding, I didn't hear much from my father. He didn't call, no text, no message, not even a congrats when we got back from the honeymoon. Janice, unsurprisingly, went quiet too. Her last act was silence, maybe because she didn't know how to spin the fact that her cruelty had finally been called out in front of a room full of people. But you know what surprised me? I didn't miss them. That aching need for their approval, the one that had followed me for decades, was gone. Like it had finally expired. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. I started therapy again, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I had stayed in that cycle for so long, why I had let their words shape my worth, why I thought love had to be earned through endurance instead of simply received. I learned that boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. That family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up for you when it matters. And most importantly, I learned that being loved, truly, deeply, without conditions, isn't something you have to beg for. It's something you choose to accept when you stop settling for less. Oliver and I moved into a small house with creaky stairs and too many bookshelves. We hosted game nights, cooked messy dinners, stayed up too late watching bad movies and good documentaries. We didn't talk much about the wedding after the first week, not because we were avoiding it, but because we didn't need to relive it to understand what it meant. But one night, a few months later, as we were sitting on the porch watching a summer storm roll in, Oliver said something I'll never forget. "You know, I didn't stand up that night to defend you," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I stood up because I knew you didn't need defending. You just needed someone to remind the room of who you are." That hit me in the chest because he was right. Somewhere inside me, I had always known who I was. I just kept waiting for someone to say it out loud so I could believe it too. Now I didn't need them to. Not Janice, not my father, not anyone. Because I had finally said it to myself. I am enough. I am worthy. I am loved, deeply, fully, and without condition. And if someone can't see that, it says nothing about my value and everything about their limits. So to anyone listening, anyone who's ever sat quietly while their worth was questioned, who's ever been told they were hard to love, or too much, or not enough, hear this. You are not the opinion of people too broken to understand your light. You are not a project to be fixed or a role to be performed. You are not pretending. And you don't have to wait for a wedding or a microphone or a dramatic moment to realize it. You only need one thing: to stop shrinking. That day didn't go how I imagined. It wasn't the perfect, glossy fairy tale. But it was honest. It was healing. It was mine. And I wouldn't change a single moment, because that was the day I stopped waiting to be loved and started standing in the love that was already mine. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or underestimated, just know you're not alone. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be loved for exactly who you are. And if you're still waiting for that moment, I hope this gave you the courage to stop waiting and start believing in your own worth. If you found meaning in this story, please take a second to like the video. It helps so much. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know who's silently carrying the same pain. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me what you would have said if you had the mic. And if you want more real, raw, and honest stories like this one, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for being here. And more than anything, thank you for listening. When I saw my daughter sitting alone on the bench while the rest of her class gathered for their photo, I felt something crack inside me. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She just sat there, quietly, with her hands folded in her lap, like she was trying to disappear. Moments earlier, I heard her teacher lean in and whisper to another staff member, "She doesn't have the right clothes." And just like that, they told my 9-year-old daughter she wasn't good enough to be seen. A few kids laughed. One boy pointed at her dress and said, "Is that from a thrift store?" I watched her lower her head. She didn't say a word. She didn't fight back. I stood there, frozen, holding the paper cups I'd volunteered to bring for picture day. My hands were shaking. I wanted to walk over and scream. I wanted to tell that teacher exactly what I thought of her, but I didn't want to make it worse for Leora. And then, just as I was about to walk to my car, a black car pulled up in front of the school. A man in a dark suit stepped out, holding a professional camera. He adjusted his tie, looked straight at my daughter, and smiled. "Let's make some magic," he said. Mornings in our house were always a little chaotic, but on picture day we tried to make it special. I had gotten up an hour earlier than usual just to iron Leora's dress. It was sky blue with tiny embroidered stars across the chest. Nothing fancy, but it was her favorite. She'd picked it out from a donation bin at church 3 months ago. It was a little big at the shoulders and a little short at the hem now, but she loved how the skirt twirled when she spun in circles. "Come here, baby," I called from the kitchen, balancing a buttered bagel on one hand and a comb in the other. "Let's fix your hair." Leora shuffled in quietly. She was never much of a morning person. Her oversized backpack dragged behind her like a shadow. I patted the chair and she climbed up, looking at me through the mirror we had stuck to the back of a cabinet with masking tape. "Do I look okay?" she asked softly, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "You look beautiful," I said, sweeping her brown hair into a ponytail. "Gorgeous. The prettiest girl in 4th grade. She tried to smile, but I saw the worry behind her eyes. Leora wasn't like the other kids in her class. She was quiet, thoughtful, and often got lost in her own world. While the other girls obsessed over dance trends and designer backpacks, Leora drew hummingbirds in the corners of her math homework. She had a gentle heart, the kind that got bruised easily. Ever since her dad died 2 years ago, she'd grown more inward, like her soul had found a corner and curled up in it. We were managing, barely. I worked mornings at a local diner and evenings cleaning offices downtown. Every dollar had to stretch, and there were plenty of nights when dinner was just eggs and toast. But I tried to keep things normal for Leora. She didn't complain, not once. She'd taped the flyer for picture day to the refrigerator a week ago, circling the date in pink marker. "Can you come to school that day?" she asked. "They said parents can help set up." I'd already picked up an extra shift that morning, but I called in and said I couldn't make it. Leora didn't ask why. She just hugged me and said thank you. That morning, I packed her lunch extra carefully. I even slipped in a cookie I'd saved from the diner's tip jar. We walked to school together, like we always did, hand in hand past houses with manicured lawns and cars that hummed instead of rattled. I tried not to notice the other kids in newer clothes, or the moms in yoga pants with lattes in hand. I didn't want Leora to notice either. As we got closer to the school, she slowed down. I felt her grip tighten around my fingers. "I hope Mrs. Kilburn likes my dress," she murmured. I knelt beside her, fixing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Leora, sweetheart, you wear what you love. That's what makes it special. You don't need anyone's approval." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. When we got to the front steps, a cluster of parents and teachers were already gathered around the gym entrance. Balloons framed the door, and a folding table held snacks and little props. Tiny chalkboards that said things like, "Class of 2033" and "Picture Perfect." Mrs. Kilburn stood nearby, clipboard in hand, her mouth pursed into what she probably thought was a smile. She was the kind of teacher who always looked like she was smelling something unpleasant. Leora gave a little wave, but the woman didn't wave back. Instead, her eyes did a quick scan of Leora's outfit, pausing just a second too long. I felt my stomach twist. I set down the bag of paper cups I'd brought and knelt beside my daughter again. "You're going to do great, okay? Just be yourself. It's all you ever need to be." "Okay," she whispered. She took a deep breath and walked toward the group. I stayed back, watching her small frame among the other kids. She looked so proud in that moment, so ready, so hopeful. If I had known what was about to happen, I never would have let go of her hand. Leora stood near the edge of the gym with the rest of her class, nervously smoothing the front of her dress. She kept checking the little mirror in her hand, adjusting her ponytail, trying to tuck in the wild strands. She was doing what so many kids do when they want to feel accepted, quietly working to make herself smaller, neater, more invisible. I stood off to the side with the other parents, clutching a stack of napkins I'd brought. It was warm in the gym, stuffy with the smell of hairspray and cupcakes. The kids buzzed with excitement. A photographer was adjusting lighting equipment at the front of the makeshift photo backdrop. Blue-gray sky, painted clouds, the words, Class of 2033, written in gold letters across the top. Mrs. Kilburn's voice cut through the chatter. Okay, everyone, find your buddy and line up by height. The kids scrambled into rows. Leora hovered near the back, unsure where to go. She was taller than some of the girls, shorter than most of the boys, and clearly hesitant. I could see her eyes darting around, looking for a place where she fit. That's when it happened. Mrs. Kilburn leaned over and whispered something to the teaching aide beside her. I couldn't hear it clearly, but I caught one phrase, one that sliced straight through me. She doesn't have the right clothes. The aide glanced at Leora, then nodded slightly. Leora, sweetheart, Mrs. Kilburn called, her voice saccharine sweet but edged with condescension. Why don't you wait over there by the bench for a little bit? Leora looked confused. She took a hesitant step forward. Just for a moment, Mrs. Kilburn said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're working on the class layout. I saw the moment it clicked for Leora. She stopped. She turned. And without saying a word, she walked to the wooden bench at the side of the gym, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. The other kids didn't miss it. One boy, the kind who always had something cruel to say, snickered. Guest picture day's only for people who shop at the mall. Another laughed. Nice dress, Goodwill girl. I couldn't move. My entire body locked up. My daughter, my beautiful, brave, quiet girl, was sitting alone while the rest of her class got ready to be photographed. The teacher didn't say she couldn't be in the picture outright. No, she did something worse. She made her feel like she didn't belong. I took a step forward. My mouth opened. I wanted to say something. I wanted to demand that they include her. But I stopped. What would I be walking into? Would I be labeled the angry mom? Would it humiliate Leora even more? She was already curled in on herself like a flower closing under cold. I looked around. None of the other parents said anything. Some were too busy chatting. A few had definitely heard the comment. They looked away. I knelt and pretended to straighten the napkins I'd brought, trying to calm the storm rising inside me. I kept glancing back at Leora. She didn't cry. That's what gutted me the most. She didn't even look upset. Just resigned. Like this wasn't new to her. Like she'd already learned what the world thought of girls like her. The class photo was taken without her. Flash, click, laughter. I stood frozen, trying not to cry in front of strangers, trying not to crumble. The event wound down quickly after that. Kids grabbed juice boxes, parents snapped selfies with their children. Leora remained on the bench, her hands now clenched in her lap. She didn't move until the crowd began to thin. She walked over to me slowly, her eyes still dry but dull. Can we go now? She asked quietly. I nodded. Yeah, let's go. We walked out of the gym together in silence. My grip on her hand was tighter this time, fiercer, protective. Outside, the sun had started to break through the clouds, but all I felt was cold. As we reached the edge of the parking lot, I turned to her and asked, Do you want to do your own picture day? She looked up at me, confused. What do you mean? I mean, we don't need them to see you. We just need the right lens. That was the moment I pulled out my phone and texted Devin Vega. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a year, not since he moved to a bigger city to take on more private clients. He used to work with my husband, James, before the accident. Devin was a wedding photographer back then, the best I'd ever seen. He'd helped us take one of the only family portraits we ever had, all three of us smiling under a tree in our backyard, James lifting Leora onto his shoulders. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second. Then I typed, Hey, are you still doing photos? I need something special. Today, if possible. It's for Leora. I hit send and started walking. I didn't tell Leora anything yet. I could feel the weight in her steps beside me, heavy, dragging, like she was trying to disappear with every footfall. We walked past the playground, through the parking lot, and toward the little hill behind the school where the pickup area ends and the sidewalk begins. My phone buzzed in my hand. I'm 10 minutes away. Say the word. I'll be there. My chest tightened. I typed back 2 words. Please come. Leora and I sat down on the edge of a low stone wall by the curb. The sun was higher now, warm against our faces. I reached into my bag and handed her a juice box I'd brought for her after the event. She took it silently, poked the straw in, and stared at the ground as she sipped. "Do you remember Devin?" I asked gently. She nodded, not looking up. "He's the camera guy." "Yeah, the one who took that picture of you and Daddy with the hose in the backyard." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "He's coming to take your picture," I said. "Just for you, not because someone told him to, not because there's a backdrop or a list, but because he knows how special you are." She looked at me then, her eyebrows slightly raised. "Why?" "Because they didn't see you in there today," I said, pointing back toward the school. "But I did, and he will." She didn't say anything, but she reached out and held my hand. Minutes passed. I kept checking the street. Then I saw it. The sleek black car pulling up to the curb, shining like it had just rolled off the lot. It looked comically out of place in front of the elementary school. The door opened, and out stepped Devin Vega. He looked exactly the same. Black slacks, fitted gray blazer, shirt unbuttoned just enough to make him look like the kind of guy who belonged in a magazine. A matte black DSLR hung from a strap across his chest. He scanned the sidewalk, spotted us, and smiled. "Leora!" he called, walking over. "I heard we've got a photo emergency." Leora blinked. She stared at him like he wasn't real. Devin knelt in front of her. "I'm Devin. We met when you were little. I used to chase you around with a camera. You hated it." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't hate it now." He grinned. "That's what I like to hear. Ready to make some magic?" She glanced at me, unsure. "Only if you want to," I said softly. Leora nodded. We walked across the field behind the school to a small grove of trees. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, delicate petals drifting down with every breeze like tiny pink snowflakes. Devin set up quickly, placing a light reflector on the grass, switching lenses, adjusting his angle. He took a test shot, checked the screen, looked at Leora. "Okay," he said. "Let's do one where you're just standing tall. Chin up, arms loose, looking past me like you're dreaming of something big." She did it. "Perfect," he said. "Click. Now give me a little spin. Hair twirl, that's it." Click, click, click. Leora started smiling. Not a forced smile, not a school photo smile, a real one. The kind that sneaks up on you and bubbles out before you can stop it. Devin lowered his camera. "You're a natural," he said. She beamed. I stood off to the side, arms crossed against my chest, not because I was cold, but because if I didn't hold myself together, I'd cry. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming relief of seeing her light come back. This wasn't just a photo shoot. It was a quiet reclaiming of her worth. A soft but powerful reminder. She mattered. And this time, someone was capturing it. Devin showed Leora the back of the camera. She leaned in, blinking at the screen like she wasn't sure that girl, strong, radiant, glowing in soft sunlight, was really her. She looked older in the photos, not in a sad way, not like the weight of the world had aged her, but like she had stepped into something new, like someone who had seen the worst part of her day and still stood tall enough to be remembered. "I look good," she said, blinking. "You look like yourself," Devin replied. "And that's more than good. That's rare." She smiled again. That time it reached all the way to her eyes. He took a few more shots while she played with a nearby branch, holding a single cherry blossom between her fingers like a tiny crown. Then, like the moment knew it had done its job, the light softened, the wind slowed, and Leora let out a breath, like she'd just exhaled something heavy she'd been carrying for years. Devin packed up. "I'll send you the edits tonight. You'll have prints tomorrow." "You don't have to rush," I said. He looked at me with that old friend smile, the one that reminded me of James. "Yes, I do. Trust me." We walked back to the front of the school just as the last few parents were trickling out, chatting and loading leftover balloons into the back of a minivan. I spotted Mrs. Kilburn near the gym door, clipboard under her arm, giving instructions to the aide who had stood silently beside her during the exclusion earlier that morning. She turned toward us. Her eyes flicked from me to Devin, then to the camera hanging over his shoulder, then to Leora. She did a double take. Leora was no longer dragging her feet or looking at the ground. She was walking straight, steady, her shoulders back, and she wasn't letting go of my hand. We stopped beside the gate. I didn't say a word. Devin, however, had no such restraint. He pulled a sleek black card from his wallet and handed it to her. "Vegas Studios," he said with an easy smile. "Feel free to reach out next time you want everyone included." He didn't wait for her to respond. He turned back to us and gave Leora a playful salute. "You were incredible today." She grinned and gave him a tiny wave. Mrs. Kilburn didn't say anything, just looked down at the card like it might bite her. We got in the car and drove home, windows down, the spring air brushing through our hair like the world was trying to start fresh. Leora leaned her head against the seat and hummed a little tune under her breath. She hadn't done that in a long time. When we got home, she went straight to the bookshelf and pulled down the old photo Devin had taken years ago, the one of James lifting her into the air, both of them mid-laugh. She stared at it for a minute, then looked up at me. "Do you think Daddy would have liked the pictures?" I didn't even hesitate. He would have framed every single one. He'd probably carry them in his wallet and show them to strangers. She giggled, the kind that starts deep and rises like bubbles. "You think he'd put one on the fridge? He'd take down the grocery list to make space." She nodded seriously. "Good, because I want to put one there too." That night, after she went to bed, Devin sent the files. Every photo was better than the last. Her face lit up like it had caught fire from the inside. The way her hair blew slightly in the wind, the petals frozen mid-fall, the proud way she stood in her dress, it all looked like something out of a magazine spread. And not just because Devin was talented, because that day Leora had been seen, really seen, not for what she was missing, not for what she didn't have, but for who she was, soft and steady, thoughtful and brave. I printed out the one where she was looking directly into the lens, lips parted slightly like she was about to say something important. I taped it on the fridge, right next to James and that old hose picture. 2 moments, 2 snapshots of truth, one of the day she was lifted into the air, and one of the day she learned to stand on her own. The next morning, the first thing Leora did when she woke up was walk straight to the fridge. Her hair was still wild from sleep, and her pajama pants were too short at the ankles, but her face lit up when she saw it. Her photo, the one Devin had sent over at midnight, printed, trimmed, and pinned neatly next to the one of her and James. The light coming in from the kitchen window landed right on her smile. She stood there quietly, studying it. "I like it," she said after a minute. "You should. You look like a superhero," I said, handing her a piece of toast. She smiled down at the photo again, then whispered, "I didn't feel like one yesterday." "You were one yesterday," I said. "You were brave." She took a bite of toast and leaned her head against my arm. "Did you tell Devin thank you?" "I did," I said, "but I think he already knew." That afternoon, I got a call from the front office at the school. The secretary's voice was stiff, like she was reading from a script. She told me Mrs. Kilburn had asked to speak with me. I asked if it was about yesterday. There was a pause, then a quiet yes. I didn't go. I didn't need to hear her explain. I didn't want a rehearsed apology or some sanitized explanation of how policies or misunderstandings had led to what happened. I already knew what had happened. And more importantly, so did Leora. She had felt it. We don't need to be invited into every room to know our worth. Some rooms aren't built to hold the right people anyway. Instead, I printed 5 more photos. I gave one to Leora's art teacher, who had always encouraged her creativity. I mailed one to my mother, who cried when she saw it. I kept one for myself, tucked inside a book I'd been reading since James passed, one I hadn't been able to finish until now. Leora brought one to school. She didn't say much when she walked in that day. She tucked the photo into her folder, walked past Mrs. Kilburn's classroom, and went straight to the library. Her art teacher told me later that she spent the whole lunch period drawing cherry blossoms around a camera with the word "seen" written in big block letters at the top of the page. That weekend, I took her to the local print shop and had her drawing turned into a poster. We hung it on her bedroom door. A few weeks later, one of the other moms from school messaged me on Facebook. "I saw the pictures Devin took. They're beautiful." I had no idea Leora was so photogenic. "She's always been beautiful," I replied. "She just needed the right lens." I didn't hear back, but I didn't need to. because this story wasn't for them. It was for every kid who's ever been left out of the frame, for every parent who's watched their child shrink under the weight of someone else's judgment, for every girl who's been told she isn't enough because her shoes aren't new, or her dress isn't on trend, or her voice isn't loud. Leora didn't need a staged backdrop or matching outfits or validation from people who couldn't see her in the first place. She needed someone to step in and say, "You matter," not because of what you wear, but because of who you are. Now, months later, that photo still hangs on our fridge. And every time I pass it, I think about the quiet power of being seen. It doesn't take a viral moment or a grand gesture. Sometimes all it takes is a black car, a camera, and a friend who shows up when it matters most, and a girl who learns that her value isn't up for debate. She told me recently she wants to be a photographer someday. "I want to take pictures of kids who feel invisible," she said, "and make them feel like superheroes." I told her she already has, because long before she picked up a camera, she showed the world what it looks like to rise. And in a way, that's the most powerful picture of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be seen. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stood up for someone who felt invisible or found your own way to be seen? I'd love to hear your story.